Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guest is Michael Kong, the CEO and CIO of Sonic Labs. Sonic was previously known as Fantom and is a layer 1 chain that rebranded earlier this year. In recent news, Sonic launched its testnet and plans for official launch of its mainnet is slated for Q4 of this year. I'm excited to have Michael on the show to talk about all things Sonic. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jackie. It's great to be on, and thanks so much for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm happy to have you. To start off, before we talk about the business and everything, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in this space?
Yeah, so long story short, basically, I first heard about Bitcoin in like 2012 from someone kind of like a bit notorious in the space now called Peter Schiff, who, I actually agree a lot with, except obviously not on like blockchain or Bitcoin or cryptos in general. But then really in 2013 is when I started exploring more about Bitcoin, because I talked to more people about what it actually is. And they were saying, decentralized money and all these sorts of concepts that people talk about now, philosophical concepts. But I really started to get involved about like late 2015 or early 2016, because when I was studying at the University of Sydney, so I did like 2 degrees simultaneously, finance and IT. In IT, there were a number of like what I would call Ethereum evangelists, just going around to like different people at different tables, and they'd be like, "Oh, hello, like how are you today? Have you heard this thing called like Ethereum? It's basically the future, and you'll be able to do like stock trading on it. You'll be able to do all these like different transactions on it. And it's kind of like Bitcoin, except you have these things called smart contracts, which is like being able to like run these computer programs. And that to me was like very compelling, because for me, like in terms of like what I want to do in the future, I kind of saw Bitcoin as a bit of like just kind of like a payments network or like a store of value. And like, although, that's obviously a very valuable technology, I wasn't like really interested in working on the payment side, I guess, like in terms of technology. So I, found like the concept about Ethereum a lot more compelling. And then in 2016, I managed to join a research project with this professor who joined us a couple of years ago called Professor Bernard Schultz, basically building tools to analyze smart contracts automatically, like find bugs and that sort of thing. A lot of programming analysis work, as we call it, or programming languages work. And then in 2017, I started up one of the first cryptocurrency funds in Australia with a few people from traditional finance. And then it's sort of a like long and bit complicated story, but how I got involved into Fantom is that we were investing in different projects and also advising on some projects in terms of the ICOs or the initial coin offerings that they were doing. And one of them happened to be this project called Fantom, and it was originally from Korea. And the guy who said that the guy who wanted to start this new project said that he had come up with these new concepts in asynchronous processing of transactions and being a lot faster than Ethereum and a lot more efficient, because he said that he wanted to build a series of different applications on Ethereum, but when he looked at Ethereum, it was too slow. And so he said that he had created this new a blockchain technology that he called Lachesis. But long story short, and this was confirmed by a recent Seoul High Court ruling, because we've been in litigation for the past 2 years, his technology was not real. It was plagiarized. And so we did an ICO in from January to June 2018, and we raised about $40 million. So it was a very popular ICO at the time. And we had raised a whole bunch of money based on these promises, and it wasn't exactly true what he was saying. But then I started to get a lot more involved, rather than just like an advisor to someone who tried to help out on the technical side and other aspects of the business. And that's when like Andre Cronje came in. So Andre, is very well known in the space as being, quote unquote, the DeFi god. When you Google his name, it comes up with, this guy's the DeFi god, decentralized finance god, for very good reasons. But he also has done a lot of tremendous work in the past, including at Fantom. So he came in and gave us a whole bunch of ideas around I have a background in distributed computing. I'm looking to explore ideas in what we call AVFT, and I have all these like ideas, and we can use the money that's been raised to try and build out these ideas and kind of fulfill the original vision as closely as we can. So I sort of looked at his background a bit, and I didn't really know much about him. Obviously, like he was a bit of a stranger to me, but I read his work at Crypto Briefing at the time when he was their code reviewer there, and we basically put together like a new tech team and basically implemented the technology that we have today. And a lot has since happened from there. So I just kind of stopped.
Okay. I'm curious, you talk about your background and then how you ended up at Fantom, now Sonic. Before we go into that, you mentioned kind of the restrictions or the government in Australia. I would guess that you are Australian. You mentioned to me that you were out there.
Yeah.
How would you compare the Australian market to other regions or countries? Because I really don't get Australian guests on that often. I've had Robbie Ferguson, but that's my extent of Aussies. So I guess before we go into everything Sonic related, how would you look at like the geographical differences?
So there's definitely like a scene here. There's some famous projects, a few famous projects that have come out of here. The two that kind of come to my mind are Immutable and Synthetic. And I actually was involved in Synthetic very early on, back in 2017, when it was a previous project known as Haven. But that's like another story. But like, yeah, a few projects have gone really, really big from Australia or led by Australian founders. But overall, I think there is like definitely like a scene here, particularly in the cities of Sydney or Melbourne. It's like, I wouldn't say it's like huge though. I wouldn't say it's like anywhere near the size of say like the US or Europe or elsewhere. But definitely like it's a growing scene that's getting bigger basically every year. I remember, for example, back in 2016, there were these meetups in Sydney called Sid Ethereum, right? Or Sydney Ethereum. And we will get like maybe like 50 guests to attend, and people every month would go and like give a presentation about whatever aspect about Ethereum or smart contracts they wanted to talk about. But then that kind of ballooned into like hundreds of people. And now there are some like conferences in Australia that are, hundreds or maybe like even like thousands of people. The government, I would say, doesn't really get involved, which is probably a good and a bad thing. So, it's a good thing in that, you don't have, I would say like crazy enforcement actions or investigations like you do maybe in other jurisdictions. But at the same time, it would be good to get more clarity about, a legal framework around digital currencies, because it's basically left in the air. Because essentially, like, I think the way that like politics works, including in Australia, it's all about like constituencies, right? And so if nobody cares about a particular issue, or not enough people care at that point in time, or people care about other issues, then usually the politicians don't really care about the sort of minor issues or issues that only a relatively small minority of people are really, really interested in, say like in blockchain and cryptocurrencies in Australia, and they'll focus on the bigger issues. So I think that's the reason why we haven't really had any good or bad legislation come through really that recently.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That's fair. Thanks for entertaining me on that one. Now, on the topic of Sonic, I feel like, and you know this, there are a ton of L1s out there. What would you say are maybe the three main differentiating factors to Sonic?
I'd say number one is the speed and the finality that we've been able to achieve. I genuinely believe that it is unrivaled, and it is not, we haven't achieved those sort of results like you've seen, for example, in the testnet that we recently published, because we've, cheated, so to speak, or we've taken like shortcuts where we're running everything on a single server and saying it's decentralized or anything like that. It all runs on the principles of what we call asynchronous processing of transactions over like multiple computers, or proof of stake mechanism, right? So it's all real, and it's all backed by like research that's recent, and also a lot of stuff in the past. It's built by serious people who have PhDs and professors and that sort of thing. So real like hardcore tech people that are dedicated to it. So I'd say that's like one differentiator. I'd say the second differentiator is more so on like branding. I think Fantom in the past was known as like the big DeFi chain, right? So if you go back to like say 2021, Fantom was like, I think maybe even like the second biggest chain at some point in terms of total value locked and all these DeFi metrics behind Ethereum. And I think a lot of that had to do with, we'd released new technology that was able to process a lot of transactions at a lower cost, or the technology is a lot better now, and we had bottlenecks still back then. But then we also had, the branding of, say, Andre's involvement from Fantom early on, to building a lot of DeFi primitives, to him talking about DeFi and then doing stuff on the Fantom chain as well. And I think that is like still a big differentiator that we have. People have seen, Andre be a bit more active and talk about some of the, projects he's looking to like launch, and why, Sonic is the right chain to do it. So I mean, that's a big differentiator there. Mm-hmm. And I think the third differentiator is the fact that I think in terms of scaling the technology, we have quite a few plans over the next 2 to 3 years where I think we can dramatically increase the performance of the technology, even for where it is now, right? And I don't think other people are really optimizing the things that we're kind of planning to optimize in the end, that will allow us to hopefully get, a fraction of the time to finality we have right now. So it's approximately 1 second, but if we can get it, a fraction of that, that would be really, really good. And just expanding as well the network capacity. I think the more and more applications you get on board, that's the objective, right? Mm-hmm. But you can only do that if you have the right technology infrastructure there. So I would say that those are 3 differentiators off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, 100%. You brought up the time to finality, and also just like the network speed. And before we started recording, I looked up all these metrics online, and it has over 10,000 transactions per second. And the average block time last I checked was also 0.4 seconds. And the time to finality was actually less than 1 second, 0.75 seconds. For those who might not understand why this even matters, can you kind of explain why is this important, and how it compares to maybe other chains out there?
Yeah. So in terms of those 10,000 transactions per second, that's in terms of our testing, that's in relation to token transfers or smart contract transfers. So if we were doing raw testing, which we've done before, on just account to account transfers or not involving smart contracts, then it goes into the tens of thousands. But I think, first of all, the reason why this is really important is because, some people say, tech is a meme and all that, does really like tech matter? It absolutely does matter, because if you want your chain to get big, you need to have the right technology there, because fundamentally, I think the business model for us, and I think any other chain out there, is essentially selling computing power. So you're selling the ability to execute transactions and to store the result of that data on chain, right? And so in order to sell computing power, and maximize your return for the validators or the people participating proof of stake, you need to have the best technology out there, right? Because it's the most efficient. And so that's why it's really, really important, because to get a chain being able to generate enormous numbers of transactions per second by real users, generating a lot of fees, where each individual transaction is a low transaction fee, then you have a really, really good network built, because it's essentially kind of like the Visa or MasterCard model, where, they charge on the transactions, except in this case, you're charging on the computing power, and it's about in relation to any sort of transaction that someone executes, whether it's like payments, whether it's like a DeFi application, or whether it's like a NFT application. And so, our objective is to, and I think other chains' objective is to basically maximize revenue by maximizing the number of transactions on the network, but also making sure that you have great user experience. Otherwise, users are going to go elsewhere, right? And so that's why like time to finality matters. It's really about user experience, which is, how fast does it take my transaction to confirm on the network when I send it to the network, when I click that button on Ravi or MetaMask or any wallet, to get a response back saying that, my transaction has gone through. And so it's kind of like, if I go to Google, the transactions per second would be how many queries Google can process per second, right? So on an aggregate level for Google, that is really, really important. But for the individual, user, they don't really care about how many transactions or how many queries Google can process per second, right? What they care about is when I enter in my search query, how fast do I get a result back and how accurate are those results? So that's sort of the differentiator between TPS and TTF and why both are important. In terms of how we compare to the others, I think other chains out there oftentimes greatly exaggerate these numbers. I think, people will say, thousands, tens of thousands. I've even heard, believe me on this, I've even heard one chain in the past years ago, obviously it doesn't exist anymore, claim that they could process 1 trillion transactions a second.
Chain was it?
Right? I don't honestly remember off the top of my head. It was some not a very good chain. It's long past, but I definitely remember. I can probably pull out some old message me commenting and laughing about it. And this is more than what's some of the most expensive databases in the world can process on a single computer. But when people actually start using some of these networks, they realize that in terms of performance, it's a lot worse than what is advertised, right? And that's because it's been exaggerated because people love those big numbers and that sort of thing. For us, it's been difficult on the marketing side because we know that the numbers we have are real. We can prove to people that it's real because the code is open source and anyone can run the benchmarks and the testing and that sort of thing. And there'll be more code open source, as we launch the Sonic Mainnet. But I think a lot of people in crypto, because the short attention spans, right? They don't really question this stuff, and they just go along with whatever numbers people say.
Right.
So I think for us, in terms of differentiating ourselves, I had a conversation with Andre the other day. It's we can talk about testnet results and and different data points, which are important because they're real and they're illustrative of what is to come. But ultimately, what the user will really care about is not these numbers that we talk about, but about the individual experience on the network itself. So once we launch the mainnet and we can prove that, oh, wow, there's many transactions going through the network. Oh, my transaction confirms really fast. Oh, my transaction fee is low. I've been doing all these transactions across DeFi, NFTs, gaming, etc., and it's all just fantastic. I think when the user experiences for themselves, they feel how fast it is and they love it. I think that's the objective, because then, those people will tell their friends and, it'll kind of spread around. And it's a really good narrative to have that, you have this great chain with some great, stories behind it, like with Andre, with, the great technology to be able to handle whatever applications you want to put on it. So that's really our objective, is just in the end, showing people and not telling people about the technology.
Yeah, I think actions speak louder than words in this situation as well. And going back to what you said about other chains, maybe, highlighting certain metrics or not showing others or manipulating them to make it look better. At the end of the day, if your experience on chain is not as good, that's what's going to be the outcome or the takeaway from users, right? And so for Sonic, do you really see maybe speed as the most important thing?
Ultimately, yes, it is the most important thing in terms of people being able to execute transactions and grow the network. But what is also really important, and what we've kind of lacked before is not really being able to market as effectively our product to people. Because when you're running a business, you obviously you're selling a product, right? So you obviously have to create the product and it's going to be good. But then you also have to market the product to people, because there are other products out there that people can choose from, right? And I think for us, we've been historically is really good at creating a great product, but not so good about selling that product. So we had a lot of introspection over the past year or so, thinking about, okay, how do we go forward with Sonic? Okay, the technology, okay, we know what we're building, we trust the tech team on that. But how do we then market this?
Is that where the rebrand came from?
Yeah, exactly. So part of the rebrand was, okay, let's ditch kind of the old name. There's, there were some, controversies around what happened in the past. For example, I told you about what happened in Korea, and there've been other things since then. And also, just kind of a fresh new look that we're launching this new chain because the very important technical reasons why. Since we're launching the new chain, why not just also rebrand and say it's a fresh start, right? That this is a new chain. This is going to have a lot of features the previous chain didn't have. For example, more infrastructure partners and the right tooling that we didn't have previously that people have always demanded from us. It's going to be branded differently. The branding is going to be more closely tied with the actual product itself. And then, how do we go out there and market to people, right? And so with, stepping out our engagement, for example, with X, I think I told the team that there's really 3 things that we need to market, right? Or 3 kind of posts we need to make. We need to make, the serious posts about, announcement of partners and technology and that sort of thing. We need to make, posts that are like meme related, right? But meme related, not for the sake of just making a meme and putting it out there, but making a meme and communicating like a very important message, whether it's about, the speed, or it's about like us compared to others, where it's about what can you do on the network. So we think that's very important. The third thing is, which we didn't do so much before, is really just like simple community engagement. Just asking the community, okay, like, what do you want to see next? What type of applications do you want to see? What can we do better? And that sort of thing. I think in this space that communities can be very tight, and you need to be able to engage with the communities and speak to them and have a conversation, rather than just like, okay, this is what we're doing, top down, you like it or you don't, but this is what we're doing. I think we need to have a bit more collaborative approach. So there's a lot of marketing initiatives, and that's why like airdrops, the grants, and other initiatives that we didn't necessarily have in the past, or were not as good in the past, I think we're going to be doing a lot better this time around.
Yeah. So on that note, we'll talk about the airdrops and Sonic Boom and everything. But when you ask the community, what do they want? What has been a common denominator?
So usually we wouldn't ask a question like, what do you want? Because that's a little bit general, but like, like in different ways. So just to give one example, it was like, in terms of tooling that you want as a developer, what do you think is missing from Opera, for example, is like a question asked before. And then people would say, for example, it would be really, really good if we had CCIP, cross-chain interoperability protocol, from Chainlink. It'd be great, if we had, for example, Gnosis Safe, multi-sig wallet. And so we listened to the community over time, and, we're just like, okay, it's very clear what builders want, right? Because in the end, there's 2 types of users. There's like the builders, and there's the people that use the applications that builders build, right? So in terms of builders, you have to engage with them and ask them, what do you want? Put yourself in their position and be like, okay, if I'm a builder, why would I want to come to Sonic or Fantom as opposed to all these other chains? And so we asked them like, what infrastructure providers? And, I mentioned a couple. And so we spent, a lot of time and effort making sure that we could get those available. And so that is like a differentiator from the past. So, now we have CCIP. We didn't have that before. Now we have Gnosis Safe. We didn't have that before. Now we have like Tenderly that we just announced. We didn't have that before. And these are all tools that developers have said to us repeatedly that they want, that was missing before. So that's what I mean about like community engagement, is just asking the community, what do you want? Like, what do you need to build your app? What would make you come to Sonic? What would make us more attractive? And, sometimes like the responses are, not very good or a bit self-serving. But oftentimes, particularly from builders, they actually are very honest and just be like, yeah, my application uses CCIP. You don't have it. I can't really deploy on you. Oh, you have it now? Sweet. I'm very keen to deploy on Sonic and try the new technology out.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that, because I feel like for some teams or core developers behind, a blockchain, they tend to kind of just ship things and say like, take it or leave it. And so to actually engage and say, okay, this is what you needed to come work on Sonic. Now we have it. I would imagine that the results have been positive thus far, right? This podcast is sponsored by Galaxy. If you're immersed in the world of Web3, Galaxy is a name you need to know. As a decentralized super app with an impressive 21 million users boasting over 100 million monthly transactions, Galaxy is elevating its impact with Gravity, the magnet chain for Web3. Gravity is designed for full chain abstraction, zero knowledge proof-based privacy, and rapid transaction speeds, all coming together to offer an unparalleled user experience. Gravity opens the door for developers to effortlessly build on the largest on-chain distribution platform, and for users, it promises an even smoother, more secure journey through Web3. It's not about being on-chain, it's about being on the right chain every single time. Galaxy is on a mission to onboard the world to Web3, and Gravity is the magnetic force that will propel the vision forward. Ready to launch your Web3 journey? Build the future on Gravity. Visit gravity.xyz for more information.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a bit of hype around the Sonic launch. I've heard, I've seen some stats and heard stories anecdotally, and I think it's all really coming together because, of the things I just mentioned, learning from the past, releasing a lot better technology, having, driving narratives with, DeFi and other things. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's all really coming together, and I'm really looking forward to the Sonic launch, which will be, I think, almost certainly for sure before the end of the year.
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait and see. On the front of developers building on Sonic right now, what type of applications are they building? What can we look forward to? Tell us kind of the inside scoop, or maybe they're building in public. So
there's some of these projects are ones that already exist on the Fantom network. So like different like DEXs and lending borrowing protocols. They're not very big at the moment. So your audience is probably not familiar with names like Equalizer, which is like a DEX, or like Polter Finance, which is a lending and borrowing protocol, and a few others. But a lot of those, I think almost all of them actually, are going to be migrating over to the new network. We also got like a really nice NFT marketplace on Fantom called PaintSwap, and we help support the teams, and they're really great teams. So they'll be like deploying on the new network. So we will have a new NFT platform right from the get-go on the new Sonic network. But then we've also given grants out to other projects that haven't deployed on Opera before, but are really looking forward to Sonic. So we haven't announced some of them yet, but for example, like one of them is Silo Finance that's getting quite a bit of traction at the moment. So they're going to be deploying on Sonic. There's a whole bunch of other DeFi protocols, some that I think are very well known to a lot of people, others that are kind of up and coming that we think have like a lot of potential. So I would say that it's mainly like DeFi sort of applications that are looking to come, which is no surprise. There's a few other like NFT gaming applications as well that said they're going to deploy on Sonic, and we've given like grants to, but mainly I would say it's DeFi applications.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And I mean, given everything you said, maybe my question will be answered by the time I ask it, but it seems like a lot of these apps and projects being built on Sonic are very crypto native. So do you see it maybe starting off as a chain that is built for people in the crypto industry? And if so, where do you see the evolution to kind of get people outside of this industry to use the apps on top of it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I kind of like discussing with Andre, like, what does he think that the short to medium long-term outlook is for crypto? And he said that in the long run, and I agree with him, that it's going to be a lot of institutions that get involved in crypto, and they're going to be getting involved, not just like buying and holding an asset, but also like tokenizing assets, running applications, and that sort of thing, right? And that's when we're going to get like really, really high adoption rates, in my opinion. I think that's still probably like 10 years away. 10 years is a long time in the space. Obviously, 10 years ago, Ethereum hadn't even launched. I think they just did the ICO. So that's like a very long-term vision. So I think in the end, it's going to be like a lot of institutional involvement that's going to get like a much wider range of people involved in crypto, other than just like crypto natives. But I think for the time being, it is largely like crypto natives at the moment, and people are like telling their friends or telling their other friends about what they can do on these networks and educating them about wallets and that sort of thing. So very much like our goal right now is really about crypto native users, right? It's really about DeFi users, because that's the customer base at the moment. We are talking to quite a big fund about an RWA deployment on Sonic as well. We definitely want to grow out that side of things as well. I think that's a much longer term play, as I just talked about. So yeah, I think appealing to crypto natives now is definitely the right strategy. I think in general, like when you look at the trends year over year, despite market fluctuations, you always have more and more people hear about crypto and getting involved in crypto. So I think naturally, like, the industry just expands upon itself. And for us, it's a matter of, okay, how do we get as many of those users that are already inside to come and deploy on Sonic and use Sonic?
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. And I briefly hinted at this before, and I figured we would talk about it. But Sonic Boom, I think, also speaks to that, in that you're going to be trying to bring people in through it. It also, incentivizes the gem holders, which we could talk about. But essentially, Sonic Boom is helping support Sonic's first wave of apps, right? And about 37.5 of its 190.5 million token airdrop is allocated to gem holders. Can you kind of tell us why Sonic decided to go this route of airdropping and allocating that amount? And yeah, we could go from there.
Yeah. So the reason why we have like airdrops and grants is that it's essentially like a subsidy to help grow your network, right? Temporarily. Because in the end, as I mentioned before, you want to have a sustainable network where you have a lot of users, you have a lot of developers, and you have, developers building great applications that users want to use, right? But earlier on, it's a bit of a chicken egg problem, right? Because if you're starting a new network, obviously like from the start, you have, on the first Genesis block, you have exactly 0 apps and you have exactly 0 users, right? So how do you incentivize people to come over to, the new network and say, okay, we want you to deploy on Sonic, and here's why you should choose, our product over the other products out there. And so obviously like one important factor is like tech, which is a differentiator. But early on, because you're not going to have many users for a new network, you have to have like other incentives out there, which are like more monetary or business based, in order to encourage people to come. And then that's how you start building like the on-chain community, right? So that's the reason why we've gone down this Sonic Gems and grants route, in that we want to incentivize both users and we want to incentivize both developers, right? And so in the past, one important lesson that we learned is that when we did an airdrop earlier on, I mean, this was back in September 2021, we announced like a big number, we allocated a lot of tokens, right? But that was very much just aimed more or less at like DeFi developers, right? And the incentive structures were not really there, keep those developers on board. We didn't really like give anything to the users. And so that wasn't like really successful in the end. But I think with, this new GEMS program, it's going to be, all sorts of applications used in the network, all sorts of transactions. We won't, publish the specific criteria for obvious reasons, because we don't want people to game it so easily. But you really need to have those incentives to really jumpstart your community. I mean, that's what we saw like observing other projects do, right? And if you structure it carefully, very carefully, and you align people's incentives to the outcome that you want, which is for us, like sustainable amounts of users and developers, you can really get there, and you can really fast track it by having this grants program. Because if we didn't have the grants program, it's probably not compelling enough just to have the new technology out there in order to encourage developers and users to come. Why? Because the new technology that's out there is unproven, so to speak, for users until you have users and developers. So it's also a bit of a chicken egg problem there, is that you want people to experience the tech and know how great it is, but no one's going to experience the tech and no one's going to know how great the tech is because they're not using it, right? So that really is like the overall like motivation behind these sorts of programs on the business side. Yeah.
Okay. So it's like airdrop brings people in, people start to realize how good the apps are and or are building. Yeah. And then, what's next? What's the next step? They stay.
Yeah, exactly.
Out. Yeah.
Yeah. They say, in the end, it's network effects, right? So the more users you have, the more revenue that can be generated for dApps, and the more revenue can be generated for the network, because you have more users, you have more transactions being submitted, right? Yeah. And having more developers means that you have more applications developed out there, the more people want to use, right? It's kind of like, like as Andre said to me the other day, it's kind of like the App Store model for like Apple, right? It's just like, you have developers and you have users, and, some applications are really, really, really popular. Most are not that popular. But then you have this competition where people want to be, the number one app in the App Store for finance or for entertainment or podcasts or whatever, right? And so that's a really good model, because that's a race to the top, right? People want to be number one. People want to be showcased on the App Store. And users know when they go to the App Store, this is what people are using. This number one finance app. I'm going to go there and start using it because, I'm confident that it's a legitimate app. And so I think if we have the same sort of incentive mechanism for us, then that's how you get a really, really big community. Because, as you know, generally in terms of network effects, it's all like kind of like 2 to the power of n, right? It's just, one person tells 2 people and they tell 4 people and they tell 8 people and that sort of thing. So the airdrop stuff is really to help kickstart that and accelerate it. And then once it starts to take off and you have that snowball effect, that's a really, really sweet situation you want to be in, because then you start growing really fast. And if you have the technology to handle that growth, which we actually didn't in the past, and that's what limited a lot of our growth in 2021, then you're just like in a fantastic spot. You've basically achieved what you sought out to achieve.
Yeah, no, 100%. It sounds exciting. And I think with everything we've discussed so far, I'd love to get like a holistic view on you on like what is the near term and long term vision for Sonic. If we could look back, let's say, or let's look forward in 6 to 12 months, what would you hope to have accomplished with Sonic? And then let's say 5 years or more.
Yeah, so in 6 to 12 months, we will definitely have the new network out by then. The new network, starting to grow really fast and people getting really hyped up about it, and the narratives around it, like for example, like in terms of DeFi narratives, and just like really start to accelerate, particularly hopefully as the market like picks up, right? So that really is like the 6 to 12 month aim in terms of launching the new network. Also launching some of the new technology improvements that we've got in the pipeline in 2025, dramatically improving the consensus model. Just to drop like a little bit of a hint here, we're almost completely redoing the consensus mechanism actually, because the consensus mechanism we have at the moment is, I think, very solid and very good, but there are a lot of optimizations that can be done there. So a lot of the work beforehand on the technology side was very much optimizing non-consensus related stuff, things like virtual machines and databases. And, we had to get into technical detail, and some optimizations to do with consensus as well, or, the ability of computers to talk one another and confirm transactions. But now we're going to really be focusing on that consensus aspect as well. And then the 5 to 10 year horizon is kind of what I described before, right? Like we want the network to be very, very large by then and be able to attract institutions which are interested in volume and having a network that, works for them. Mm-hmm. And then that's how you get like the real big adoption outside of the people already involved in crypto at the moment, which is, to be honest, like worldwide, like millions of people. But then, the world population is like 8 billion or so. So it's still a tiny fraction. Right. But I think we'll start to get hundreds of millions of people, et cetera, kind of like how the internet grew once we have, big institutions involved. So 5 to 10 years is really like more of an institutional play. 6 to 12 months is more still building out more of the core technology and focusing on crypto natives.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it all pans out for you guys. Michael, one of the things I like to ask my guests before we wrap things up is, can you leave us with a piece of advice? Maybe something you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry.
Yeah, I'd say like one really important piece of advice is that the most important thing in any aspect of life, I think, right? In terms of running a business, whatever it might be, is that you need to surround yourself by good people. And what I mean by good people are not just people who are competent at their job, whether it's, technology, being a really good developer, or, being really good at sales or anything like that. It's also like being really good as like a team player. So you need someone who's technically competent at their job, but who's also a team player who, is honest and respectful, but also, not afraid to state, what they're thinking about, is ultimately a team player, which means, it's important to disagree with people if you think you have a disagreement, but, you need to be respectful of other people's opinions and work together as a team to achieve stuff. In my experience, if you don't have one or the either or the other, it's never going to really work out. And that causes a lot of problems in organizations that can like really bring down organizations. So that would be my one piece of advice, is that really think about people in terms of their competencies and in terms of like who they are holistically as an individual. Yeah. So that's kind of like long-winded.
No, I agree 100%. Respect, teamwork, and trust is so important. So yeah, Michael, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. Again, like really appreciate the invitation.
Of course.